My name is Renata Osi, and I am 31 years old, and I need to tell you something that I have never said out loud to anyone except my lawyer and my neighbor, Mrs. Feldman, who is 73 years old and keeps a notebook of everything she witnesses from her front porch, because she says, and I quote, "Old women are invisible, and invisible women see everything." I want to start with the night everything changed, not the night I left, not the night the papers were signed. See, the night I was standing in my kitchen at 11:45 p.m., holding a bowl of cereal I had no appetite for, listening to my husband, Tobias, laugh on the phone in the next room, while our 6-year-old daughter, Zara, was upstairs running a temperature of 103.8 and had been for the past 2 days. He wasn't calling the doctor. He was calling his brother, Kwame, to confirm their fishing trip details for that coming Friday. I stood in that kitchen and I listened to him laugh. And I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not sad quiet, not crying quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before a person decides something permanently. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story did not start that night. It started 3 years earlier, and if I'm honest with you, it started the very first time I told Tobias I was scared about something, and he told me I was being too sensitive. I met Tobias Anand at a mutual friend's outdoor birthday gathering when I was 27. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who remembered your drink order and made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room when he looked at you. He worked as a senior account manager for a logistics company. Good salary, respectable position, presentable in every room he walked into. I was working as a dental hygienist at a group practice and finishing a part-time business administration certificate at night because I had plans. I always had plans. My mother raised me in Brampton, Ontario, just her and me after my father passed when I was 9, and she cleaned office buildings from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning for 11 years to keep us in a decent apartment and me in after-school programs. My mother did not raise me to sit still and wait for life to happen. Tobias and I dated for 14 months before he proposed. The proposal was at a restaurant, ring and a dessert, the whole production. I said yes. I was happy. I want to be clear about that, because what came next doesn't erase what came before. I was genuinely happy standing at that altar at 28 years old, believing in the person across from me. The first year of marriage was manageable. There were small things I noticed, but filed away as adjustment, as two people learning each other's rhythms. Tobias was not a naturally empathetic person, but I told myself empathy could be taught. He was not a naturally attentive person either, but I told myself attention was something you built together over time. What I did not fully understand yet was that there is a difference between a person who is still learning to show up and a person who simply does not believe showing up is their responsibility. That distinction took me 3 years to learn, and it cost me more than I can calculate. Zara was born 18 months into our marriage, and she was, from her very first breath, the clearest and most magnificent thing that had ever happened to me. She came out screaming and red-faced and absolutely certain of her own importance, and I loved her so completely in that first moment that it rearranged everything inside me. Tobias was present at the birth. He held her. He cried, which surprised me because I had never seen him cry before. I thought maybe fatherhood would open something in him that marriage hadn't. It didn't. The sleepless nights were mine. The sick days were mine. The pediatrician appointments, the daycare research, the first aid certification I took because I wanted to be prepared. All of it mine. Tobias provided financially without complaint, and he was not cruel. I want to be honest about that too. But he operated as though his role in our family was to earn money and occasionally appear in photographs. Everything else, the actual texture of daily life with a small child, he treated as background noise that didn't require his direct involvement. When I brought it up, which I did, more than once, more than 5 times, with different words and different approaches, and different levels of calm, and different levels of not calm, his response was almost always a variation of the same thing. "You're more sensitive about this stuff than I am. You're a worrier, Renata. Not everything needs to be a crisis." I trust your judgment with her. Why are you making that into a problem? That last one was the most sophisticated because it sounded like a compliment. I trust your judgment. What it actually meant was, I am outsourcing my parental responsibility to you and framing it as faith in your abilities so that you cannot object without sounding ungrateful. I see that clearly now. I didn't see it then. Or maybe I saw it, but I was not ready to act on what I saw. Those are different things, and neither one is shameful. Let me tell you about the fishing trip. Tobias had a group of friends he had known since university. 5 of them. They called themselves something I refuse to repeat because it was the kind of group name grown men give themselves that makes you understand certain things about their collective emotional maturity. Every year they did a trip together. 1 year it was Vegas. 1 year it was a cottage in Muskoka. 1 year it was apparently a golf resort in Arizona that I found out about primarily through a credit card statement. This year it was a 4-day fishing trip up north, leaving Friday morning, returning Monday evening. He told me about it on a Tuesday. Zara had been unwell since Sunday. Not dramatically unwell. Not emergency room unwell. But that particular kind of unwell that parents of small children recognize. The low-grade persistent fever, the loss of appetite, the unusual quietness, the way she wanted to be held more than usual, but was too uncomfortable to settle. She had started the school year 3 weeks earlier and had already brought home 2 colds in succession, which her pediatrician had told us was completely normal for children newly in group settings, their immune systems making introductions. But this felt different to me. There was something about the way she was holding her right ear. I mentioned this to Tobias on Tuesday evening. I said, Zara has been running a temperature for 2 days, and she keeps touching her ear. I think I should take her to the doctor before the weekend. He looked up from his phone. Kids touch their ears. She's probably just tired. I am not a doctor, and I want to be clear about that. But I am Zara's mother, and I had been her mother for every single day of her 6 years, and I had developed a specific and intimate knowledge of the patterns of her body and her behavior, and something did not feel right to me. I called the pediatrician's office Wednesday morning. They were booked, but offered a Thursday afternoon slot. I took it. Thursday afternoon, the doctor examined Zara and confirmed a developing ear infection in the right ear. She prescribed a course of antibiotics, recommended rest and fluids, and said she should start feeling better within 48 hours of beginning the medication. I texted Tobias from the parking lot of the medical building. Ear infection confirmed. She's on antibiotics now. She should improve by the weekend, but she's still not herself. He replied, Good you caught it. See, you always worry, but it works out. Still planning to leave Friday morning. Should be on the road by 7. I read that text 3 times. I want you to understand what I was being told. Our daughter had a confirmed ear infection. She was unwell, on new medication, and not yet improved. And his response was to note that his plans remained unchanged. I called him instead of texting back because I did not want to say what I needed to say in writing while I was still this angry. Tobias, I need you to consider staying this weekend. At least the first night or 2. She just started antibiotics. She's uncomfortable. She wants both of us right now. Pause. Renata, she has an ear infection, not a rare disease. You have the medication. You know what to do. I've had this trip planned for 3 months. I know you've had it planned. I'm asking you to weigh that against Zara being sick. She's not seriously sick. You know she's not seriously sick. You're doing that thing where you catastrophize. I'm not catastrophizing. I'm telling you, our daughter is sick, and she would benefit from her father being here. Another pause. I'll have my phone on the whole time. You can call me any time. That's not the same as being here. Renata! His voice shifted into something I can only describe as terminally patient, the tone a person uses when they have decided the other person is being unreasonable and they are generously tolerating it. You are an excellent mother. You are more than capable of handling a few days with a kid who has an ear infection. This is exactly the kind of thing I mean when I say you don't trust yourself. I ended the call. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes, and then I drove home to my daughter. Friday morning arrived, and Zara's temperature was 101.4, which was lower than Wednesday and Thursday, which was technically progress. But she had cried twice in the night from the ear pain, and she looked pale, and she had eaten half a piece of toast for breakfast and left the rest. Tobias came downstairs with his gear bag at 6:45. He looked at Zara on the couch under her blanket, watching cartoons with heavy eyes. He sat beside her. "Hey, little bug, how's the ear?" She leaned against him. "Hurts a little." "It's going to get better really soon. Mummy has your medicine. You're going to feel great by the time I'm back." "Okay?" She nodded. She was 6. She believed him. He kissed her forehead and stood up and picked up his bag. He looked at me in the kitchen doorway. "She looks better than yesterday." "She cried twice in the night from pain." He nodded slowly, as though I had said something mildly inconvenient. "Call me if it escalates." He kissed me on the cheek, and I stood very still and did not move, and he walked out the front door, and I heard his truck reverse out of the driveway. And then I heard silence. And in that silence, my daughter looked over at me from under her blanket, and I smiled at her, and I said, "Okay, love, what do you want for breakfast?" And I made her whatever she wanted, and I held her all morning, and I was fully, completely present, because at least one of us was going to be. Mrs. Feldman's full name is Harriet Feldman, and she has lived across the street from us for 9 years, which means she was there before Tobias and I moved in, which means she knew the previous owners, which means she has an institutional knowledge of this street that most people underestimate. She is a retired administrative director from a hospital system. She speaks 3 languages, and she does in fact keep a small wire-bound notebook in the front pocket of her gardening apron. She also has a daughter in Vancouver and a son in London, and she takes her neighborhood seriously in a way that I have come to understand is actually a form of profound love. I met her properly about 2 months after we moved in, when she appeared at my door with a casserole dish and the information that our front walk had a loose flagstone that was a liability issue, and she had already researched the bylaw. I liked her immediately. We had coffee that afternoon, and about once a week after that. She did not like Tobias. She never said this directly. She said things like, "He seems like a man who has high expectations of other people," and "I notice he doesn't come to the neighborhood association meetings, even though you always do." And once, memorably, "Your mother must be proud of how hard you work, Renata." The last one was said while watching Tobias park his car and walk past the bags of groceries in the trunk without taking any inside. That Friday afternoon, about 3 hours after Tobias left for his fishing trip, Mrs. Feldman knocked on my door. She had? I told her the situation. She came inside. I told her the situation. She came inside and sat down and listened to the entire thing without interrupting, which is a rarer skill than people realize. And when I was done, she looked at me for a moment, and then she said something that I want you to remember. "Renata, I have worked in hospital administration for 31 years. I have watched families in waiting rooms across every kind of crisis you can name, and I will tell you what I know to be true. The ones who show up are not the ones who were free. They are the ones who decided that nothing else came first." I didn't say anything. She patted my hand and said, "Now, let me sit with Zara for an hour while you go lie down, because you look like you haven't slept properly in 3 days." She was right. I hadn't. Saturday was when things shifted. Zara had slept better Friday night, which was a relief, but when she woke Saturday morning, she was not improving the way the doctor had indicated she should on the antibiotics. Her fever had gone up slightly rather than down, and the ear pain seemed worse, and she had a new complaint, a headache, which she described with the specific vocabulary of a 6-year-old as, "My brain feels squished." I called the after-hours pediatric line. Given the combination of symptoms you're describing, the timeline, and her age, I'd recommend bringing her in to be evaluated today. I wouldn't wait on this. I texted Tobias. "Taking Zara to the hospital. Something is off with her symptoms. Nurse advised I bring her in." I picked up Zara, got her into her car seat, and drove. Tobias called back 7 minutes later. I answered through the car speakers. What do you mean you're taking her to the hospital? I thought the antibiotics. The antibiotics haven't resolved it the way they should have. She has a headache now. Her fever went up. The nurse said to bring her in. Kids get headaches. Tobias, I'm already driving. I'm not calling to debate this. Okay. Keep me updated. It's probably just the infection working through her system. I'll let you know what they find. Do you need me to? I'll let you know what they find. I hung up. I want to tell you what the hospital visit revealed because it matters. Zara had developed a secondary infection. The ear infection, insufficiently treated in the early stages because it had gone unexamined for slightly too long before the Thursday appointment, had progressed, and the antibiotics she had been prescribed were not fully effective against the specific strain. She needed a different antibiotic. She needed IV fluids because she was mildly dehydrated, and they wanted to monitor her for 4 hours minimum before deciding on admission. We were there for 6 hours. Mrs. Feldman, who I had called from the car, showed up 40 minutes after we arrived. She had called her daughter in Vancouver on the way, she told me, to have someone to talk to while she drove, and she walked in carrying a tote bag with a change of clothes for Zara, a thermos of tea, and 2 of those small packets of almond cookies that Zara inexplicably loved. How she knew about the almond cookies, I still do not know. She sat with me for the full 6 hours. I texted Tobias at the 2-hour mark. Secondary infection, different antibiotic, IV fluids, being monitored. She's okay, but this is more serious than the ear infection alone. He read it. I could see the read receipt. He replied 43 minutes later. Okay, thank God she's okay. My daughter in a hospital with an IV in my daughter in a hospital with an IV in her arm warrants the inconvenience of ending my fishing trip early. Give me permission to care. I typed back, that's your decision to make, Tobias. He did not come back. Zara was not admitted overnight, which was the good news. By the 6th hour, she had responded to the new medication. Her fever had dropped. She had eaten half the almond cookies, and she had fallen asleep on the hospital cot with her head on my lap and Mrs. Feldman's cardigan tucked around her feet. The doctor cleared us to go home with strict instructions and a follow-up appointment Monday. Mrs. Feldman drove us home because she said I was in no condition to drive, and she was not wrong. She helped me get Zara into bed, made me eat something, and then sat across from me at the kitchen table in my quiet house at 9:30 on a Saturday night. You know, she said very calmly, my late husband Bernard missed our son's appendectomy. He had a work conference. This was 1987. He believed it was genuinely acceptable. She folded her hands on the table. He spent the next 4 years trying to make that up to us, and he never quite managed it. Not because I punished him, but because some absences write themselves into the story of a family and they don't come out. I asked her if she had ever forgiven him. Of course I forgave him, she said. I loved him. But forgiveness doesn't delete the memory. It just stops the memory from rotting. She went home at 10. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, and I started writing everything down. Every date, every comment, every time I had asked and been told I was overreacting. Every time Tobias had framed my concern as a character flaw rather than a legitimate need. I wrote for an hour and a half. I filled 8 pages. Tobias came home Monday evening. He walked in with a cooler that I assumed contained fish, set it on the kitchen floor, and said, "Where's my girl?" "Upstairs. She's resting." He went upstairs. I heard him talking to her, heard her small voice answering. He came back down 10 minutes later. "She looks much better." "She is better. She had a hard Saturday. You handled it really well." He opened the fridge. "The trip was good, by the way. Kwame caught a 40-inch pike." I stood very still. He turned around and saw my face. "What?" "Nothing, Tobias." "You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "That quiet thing where you're angry, but you won't say it." "I'm not angry." "Then what?" I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had chosen, this man I had believed in, Says this man who had just told me about a fish his brother caught while our daughter was in a hospital with an IV in her arm. I'm deciding something, I said. Deciding what? I haven't finished deciding yet. I went upstairs to check on Zara. What came next unfolded over about 6 weeks, and it came from directions Tobias never anticipated. Partly because he had spent our entire marriage operating on the assumption that I was too sensitive and too cautious and too overwhelmed to be a threat to the life he had built. He was wrong about all of it. Mrs. Feldman, as I mentioned, was a retired administrative director from a hospital system. What I had not mentioned to Tobias, because Tobias had never once asked a substantive question about Mrs. Feldman beyond her first name, so was that her late husband Bernard had been a family law attorney, and her son in London was also a family law attorney, and her closest friend of 40 years, a woman named Dr. Octavia Reyes, ran a women's legal resource clinic 2 neighborhoods over that offered free initial consultations on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Mrs. Feldman told me about Dr. Reyes on the Sunday after I wrote my 8 pages. She did not tell me what to do. She handed me a card and said, "Just information, in case it's useful." I called on Tuesday. Dr. Reyes was direct and warm in equal measure, and she looked at my 8 pages and the hospital documentation and the text message exchanges with the composure of a woman who had seen this particular architecture many times before. "Your documentation is excellent," she said, "and I want you to understand that in this province, pattern documentation of this kind is admissible and relevant. This isn't about one fishing trip. What you've built here is a record." She referred me to a full family lawyer named Solomon Achebe, and she told me he was the best she knew for situations with a child involved. I met with Solomon the following week. He was methodical and unhurried, and he asked questions I hadn't thought to prepare for, about finances, about shared assets, about Tobias's work history and mine. And at the end of that meeting, he said something that I wrote down in my notebook. "You came in thinking you needed to justify leaving. You don't. You need to understand what you're entitled to and what your daughter is entitled to. Those are different questions, and they have clear answers." The text message. Let me tell you about the text message, because this is the moment where things became very complicated for Tobias in a way I did not engineer and did not predict. Tobias worked at a mid-sized logistics firm. His direct manager was a man named Felix Drummond, who I had met at 2 work functions and found pleasant in a surface-level way. Felix had a wife, Priya, who I had spoken to briefly at both functions, and who had struck me as the kind of person who paid attention. About 3 weeks after the hospital weekend, I was at a school fundraiser at Zara's school. It was a bake sale and an outdoor family thing, the kind of low-stakes community event I had always attended alone because Tobias found these things, his word, exhausting. So Priya Drummond was there. We ended up standing next to each other at the lemonade table. We had not seen each other since the last work function, which had been 8 months earlier. We made small talk. She asked about Zara, and I said casually, without particular drama, that Zara had had a rough few weeks, a hospital visit, a secondary infection, the works. Priya's face changed slightly. "My God," she said, "was Tobias with you?" And I paused just a fraction too long. "He was on a trip," I said. "He was up north with some friends." There was a silence. Priya Drummond was a neonatal nurse. I did not know this until she told me right then, in the same quiet voice, that she had spent 15 years in pediatric care, and that there was no such thing as a hospital visit with a secondary infection that was not serious, and that she was so sorry I had been alone for that. I told her the truth, briefly, calmly, without theatrics. The ear infection, the progression, the call to the after-hours line, the 6 hours, the IV, the text asking should I come back. She listened without interrupting. I thought nothing more of it. The following week, Tobias came home from work looking unsettled in a way I had not seen before. He sat down at the kitchen table, which was unusual, and he looked at me with an expression that had something new in it. "Felix called me into his office today." I waited. Apparently, Priya mentioned something to him. About the hospital weekend. Priya is a neonatal nurse, I said. She had thoughts about it. Renata, that's my professional environment. You shouldn't be. I ran into her at a bake sale, Tobias. She asked how Zara was. I told her the truth. You made me look. I told the truth about what happened. I didn't editorialize. I didn't ask her to say anything to Felix. I had no idea she would. But I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth. He stared at me. Felix said my judgment was something they'd been discussing. Your judgment, I said carefully, is something a lot of people seem to be discussing lately. I got up and started making dinner. He did not speak for the rest of the evening. The conversation that ended, everything happened on a Thursday. Tobias came home from work already agitated. He had been passed over for a project lead role he had expected. He did not tell me this directly. I found out from something he said on the phone to his brother, a conversation he did not know I could hear because I was in the hallway and he was in the kitchen. After he hung up, he came to find me. I need to talk to you about what's been happening. We sat down. I feel like things are coming at me from everywhere right now, and I think we need to reset. I agree that things are coming at you, I said. I'd like to talk about why. I think you've been building a case against me. The note-taking, whatever you said to Priya. I've been documenting my own life, Tobias, and I spoke honestly to another mother about what happened to our daughter. Those aren't crimes. It feels deliberate. The deliberate thing was you leaving on a fishing trip when your daughter was sick. Everything that came after was consequence. One trip, Renata. I left on one trip. And there it was. The line I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. I need you to hear me say this clearly, I said. Not as an accusation, just as a true thing. It was not one trip. It was every time you called my fear overreacting. It was every time you framed my exhaustion as a personality flaw. It was every sick night, and every school event, and every 3 a.m. that I handled alone while you slept. The fishing trip was the last one. It was not the only one. He said nothing. I've been speaking with a lawyer, I said. Dissolved. You're serious. I have been dissolved. You're serious. I have been serious for longer than you realized. I want to be honest with you about what happened after, because I think honesty is the only thing worth giving you here. He was not a monster in those weeks. He was a man who had genuinely not understood what he was doing, and who was now being required to see it. And that reckoning is not a comfortable thing to witness, even when you are the one who initiated it. He asked if there was any way to fix things. I told him I didn't think we were in a place where fixing was the right word. He asked if I was certain, where I told him I had been certain since a Saturday night, when I drove my daughter to a hospital alone, and received a text 43 minutes later, asking whether he should come back. He went quiet. The legal process with Solomon was methodical and largely uncombative, which surprised people who expected more drama. Tobias, once he understood the documentation I had and what it represented, did not want to fight it into a courtroom. We agreed on shared custody, alternating weeks, with a provision that any medical situation involving Zara defaulted to joint decision-making with documentation requirements. Child support was calculated correctly and fairly. Solomon told me afterward that the medical records alone, combined with the time-stamped text exchange, made my case effectively bulletproof, not because of the anger in them, because of what was absent. He had not come back. That absence was documented, time-stamped, and completely unambiguous. Zara is 7 now. She is loud and particular and obsessed with a television program about deep-sea creatures that I have now watched enough of to have genuine opinions about anglerfish. She waves at Mrs. Feldman every morning across the street. I went back to work full-time 6 months ago, and I have been working toward a practice management certification because I have plans. I've always had plans. My mother taught me that. The blog I started, mostly just writing about single parenting and what I have learned about my own limits and my own capabilities has found more readers than I ever anticipated. I don't write about Tobias. I write about the things I know, which are raising a small person alone and finding out that alone is not the same thing as lonely if you build the right life around yourself. Mrs. Feldman reads every post. She always texts me afterward with something brief. Good one today, or made me think of Bernard, or occasionally just a small star emoji, which from Harriet Feldman is essentially a standing ovation. Dr. Octavia Reyes spoke at a community event last spring about women understanding their legal rights in family situations, and I sat in the front row and thought about the Tuesday. I walked into her office with 8 handwritten pages and no clear plan, and she looked at my notes and said, "Your documentation is excellent," like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. It was not ordinary. It was the most important thing I had ever done with a pen and a notebook. I want to leave you with this. There was a long time when I explained Tobias to myself as a man who was still growing. A work in progress. Someone who just needed more time to understand what being a partner and a parent actually meant in practice, and not just in theory. I think that story we tell ourselves, that the person is coming, that they are on their way to becoming who we need them to be, is one of the most expensive stories we ever buy. Because we pay for it in the years we spend waiting. And the years don't come back. I am not telling you to leave. I understand leaving is complicated and terrifying and requires resources and courage that aren't always available on the same day. But I am telling you to stop explaining the person to yourself. Look at what they do, not what they say about what they do, not what they intend, what they actually do on the ordinary days and on the days when your daughter is in a hospital and they have a choice to make. Watch what they choose. You write it down. And then decide what you know. Tobias once told me I was too sensitive. I have thought about that many times in the past year, and here is my final understanding of it. I was not too sensitive. I was exactly sensitive enough to feel the truth of what was happening, and precise enough to document it, and strong enough to act on it. He called it a flaw. It turned out to be everything.